Okay, so this is ELS 241, Survey of English Literature, Part 1. This suggests that the course will have Part 2 in the second semester. So what we do is that in the course, take a bird's eye view of the human ages, their character, and their literature. From the classical period to the present time. So the course usually takes people on a ride through the human ages. From the classical period to the present time. What we do, we take each age, we examine the character of the age, the major characteristics of the age, the major events of the age, and then we look at how all of these are reflected in the literature of the age. So that's how the course works. And being that this is the first part of the course, we are going to go as far back as the classical period. And for this part of the course, we're only going to look at 3 eras, 3 epochs in human history. We're going to look at the classical period, the medieval period, and then the Renaissance, right? And we are 3 on the course. We have Dr. Denwan, my very humble self, and Mr. Michael Sukwo. After the class, you take the course outline, and then with the copy, you know what your topics are, and the lecturers who are to teach them. Okay? So I am to take the classical period. My part is the classical part. So I'll take you through the classical period. Mr. Michael Sukwo will take you through the medieval period, and Dr. Denwan should handle the Renaissance period. So the classical period is the period of the Greeks and the Romans. The classical period is the period of the Greeks and the Romans. And it is usually located in the 5th and 4th centuries BC. It is usually located in the 5th and 4th centuries BC. As I usually say, you must note that in the classical period, we count the ages backward. So you have 5th, 4th, 3rd, and so on, BC, in a descending order. The classical period is very important to world literature and to other disciplines in the academia. usually called the age of perfection, or the golden age. The age when everything was at its best form, its perfect form. The age of perfection, the golden age when everything was at its best form. So that today, when we say that something is a classic, then it means it is the best example of itself. To say that a book is a classic means the best example of itself. So it is from our understanding of the classical period that we have that idea. What is classical? The best of its kind. So you might call it the best moment in human history. When knowledge in all human fields of study was developed. When knowledge in all human fields of knowledge was developed. So that today it is difficult to find any discipline that will not trace its origin back to the classical period. It is difficult to find any discipline that will not trace its origin back to the classical period. Whether you're talking about mathematics, there were great mathematicians in the classical period. Talk about agriculture, they were great pioneers in the classical period. Talk about literature, you have to go back to the classical period to know how it started. Because it was the golden age for everything. Right? Talk about chemistry, engineering, all fields of human knowledge can trace themselves back to this moment in history. So literature is not excluded. You cannot begin to talk about literature without referring to the ancients, the people who knew it all, and whom we are even trying to follow in their footsteps, because they were the best. Or so they are considered. So, Alfred North Whitehead once said, that all of Western literature is but a footnote to Plato. All of Western literature is but a footnote to Plato. Alfred North Whitehead once said that all of Western literature is but a footnote to Plato. What that statement implies, and it's a kind of hyperbole, exaggeration, but there's truth in it, in the sense that you cannot but make reference to the ancient writers when you're talking about literature. Okay? You cannot help but make references to Western writers, like Plato, when you're talking about literature, because they wrote all that needed to be written. You can only develop from what they did. So that's how important the classical period is. Now, one thing that I need to point out to you is that the classical period may not be a period in English literature, because remember, the title of the course says Survey of English Literature. But when you get to the Renaissance, you will understand why we had to begin, why you must know something about the classical period. Okay? So, while the classical period is not, mind you, a period in English literature, it is deserving of study because knowing what happened in the classical period will help you understand English literature better. If you know what happened, if you know the literary proceedings of the classical period, your understanding of English literature will be better. All right? So that is why we have to study the classical period, despite the fact that it is not a period in English literature. It's actually a period in world literature. All right? So, the period in English literature actually begins with the medieval period. English literature actually begins with the medieval period. All right? But because the Renaissance writers did nothing except to take motivations from the classical period, we must, as a matter of relevance, necessity, study the classical period. So, a philosophy that regulated life in the classical period was humanism, called humanism. What we might call classical humanism. Classical humanism. Just as the name suggests, humanism is a man-centered philosophy. Just as the name suggests, humanism is what? Man-centered philosophy. Humanism is a man-centered philosophy. The humanitas. It emphasizes love for all human things. It emphasizes love for all human things. Humanism emphasizes love for all human things. It emphasizes things that concern human beings. The idea that man should know himself, study his environment, develop himself, his environment. Man should love other human beings. That man should love other human beings. And that man should love other human beings, care for other human beings, and then care about human concerns. That is what humanism is all about. And there's no other area of study that really concerns itself with man except literature, or modern literature. Because literature depicts human existence. So first of all, humanism emphasizes love for all human beings at a time when war and conquest and expansion of empires led to war and bloodshed, killings of other human beings. So humanism emphasizes love for all human beings, the need for human beings to love one another and stay in peace with one another. And this came at a time when the need for kings to expand their empires through war and conquest led to bloodshed and killing of other human beings. Okay? That's the first part of what humanism, or classical humanism, is all about. Then the second part has to do with the development of all human fields of knowledge, including literature, for the betterment of man. Anything that is done for the betterment of man is humanistic. So the development of all fields of knowledge for the improvement of humanity constitutes humanism. And the idea of classical humanism can be gleaned from the intellectual activities of Plato and Aristotle. It should be noted that classical humanism can be understood if we study the actions of Plato and Aristotle. So we are going to look at Plato's humanism, and we look at Aristotle's humanism. And we are doing this to see how their humanism affected literature. Plato's humanism, ladies and gentlemen. Plato's humanism. Plato lived between 427 and 347 BC, before Christ. BC means before Christ. Plato lived between 427 and 347 BC. This is before Christ. We also have BCE, which means before the Common Era, used for religious neutrality, for the purpose of religious what? Neutrality. For those who are not Christians like you. We like to use BCE, which means before the Common Era. Alright? But in Christian states, you can say BC, before Christ. Most of Plato's ideas concerning literature can be found in such publications as Ion, Plato, and the Republic. And the Republic. Please underline the others. Whenever you see the title of the text, underline. Right? Anytime you see the title of the text, just underline. If you don't underline the title of the text, then you have not Reason it well. If you are typing it, you italicize it. But don't italicize and underline at the same time. Plato believed that ultimate reality is spiritual, which he called the ideal or the one. Ideal. Plato believed that ultimate reality is spiritual, and this is called the ideal or the one. So, in the Republic, Plato was seeking the ideal. He wanted to represent what an ideal society should look like. He wanted to represent to us what an ideal society should look like. An ideal society is how a society should be, how it should work. It might not necessarily exist in reality, but it points us to where we should aim to get. Okay? Plato had a school that was called the Academy. Plato had a school that was called the Academy. Plato had a school called the Academy, and at the entrance of the school, he had this inscription. At the entrance of the school, he had this inscription. Let no one enter here who is not a geometer. Let no one enter here who is not a geometer. Let no one enter here who is not a geometer. Geometer is spelled Geometer. Let no one enter here who is not a geometer. So geometer, within that context, means one schooled in formal logic and reasoning. One who is an expert, who is well trained in formal logic and reasoning. Let no one enter here who is not a geometer. Where geometer means one who is an expert in logic and reasoning, or in logical reasoning. Plato also believed that literature propagated falsehood in society. Plato at one point had this extreme belief that literature propagated falsehood in society. Literature propagated falsehood in society, and that writers should be banished from the ideal society. Writers should not be allowed to exist in the ideal society. Okay? Because literature being an imitation or literature being fiction does not aim at the truth or reality. Literature being fiction, because Plato saw literature as fiction. Alright? Literature being fiction is a lie, is falsehood, does not aim at the truth. And in the Republic, Plato wants to search for the truth. And within the context of this language, truth is synonymous with reality. Truth is equal to reality. Whenever Plato says truth, this is what he means. So if he says if literature is fiction, right? If literature is fiction, then literature is a falsification of reality as far as Plato is concerned. And because of that, it does not aim to tell the truth, to say the truth, to represent the truth. And if it does not aim to represent the truth, which is reality, then it is not good for the young people. It's not good for the young people. It's not good for the young people. And so, should be banished. So, in a nutshell, Plato did not allow literature to exist in the ideal society, in the Republic. In the ideal Republic. At length, he relented. And said that only good or morally upright poets whose works support the state must be allowed, but that their work should be scrutinized. At length, he relented and accepted good and morally upright writers whose works are also equally good and morally upright. But that they should be what? Censored or regulated by the state. Maybe that's why we have censorship board today, which looks at works that are published and see whether they are good enough to be consumed by society, whether they are films or books and all of that. So how did Plato arrive at this idea? Let us look at the Republic. To know how Plato arrived at this idea, let us look at the Republic. In the Republic, which is presented in the form of a dialogue, as was the manner of writing at the time, the main character in the work is Socrates. The main character in the Republic, in the ideal Republic, is Socrates. Socrates was actually Plato's teacher. Socrates was actually Plato's teacher. Socrates taught Plato. He was known for using the Socratic method. Was known for using the Socratic method, which is a series of questions and answers. He will ask you one question. When you answer, he asks you another one as a rejoinder to help you arrive at the truth. So he uses the Socratic method to help people to arrive at the truth and solve their moral questions. So today, when people teach by asking questions, we call it the Socratic method. Okay? You can have a class where I come and then we only talk in questions and answers. When you answer this question and ask another one till we get to the end, you arrive at the truth, at the answers. And then the class is dismissed. That is the Socratic method. So he uses a series of questions in the form of dialogue, because when I ask you the question, you have to answer to teach truth to the youth of Athens. Okay, he was very powerful and had immense influence on the young people of the city. So at the point he was accused of corrupting the youth, and he was tried, found guilty, and executed through poisoning, being made to drink the hemlock. So his students, Plato, immortalizes him in the Republic by making him the chief character, all right, who leads the dialogue in the Republic. So one of the major themes of the work, one of the major themes of the Republic is the relationship between justice and happiness. The relationship between justice and happiness. And the thesis of the work is that living a just life leads to a happy life. And living a just life leads to a happy life. And you live a life of justice, doing well by others, doing right by others, you'll be happy yourself. Okay? This work is situated in Plato's ideal city, or ideal state, that is called the Callipolis. The Callipolis. This is the ideal republic. The Callipolis. It is the ideal city in Plato's republic. And in the work, he's trying to show us how the ideal society should look like. The Republic is organized in 10 books. Plato's Republic is organized in 10 books. Plato's Republic, we say as much as we can about the Republic, but when you get to the library and you find a copy, read. Or wherever you find a copy, read. It's organized in 10 books. In book one, Socrates and Glaucon visit the Piraeus. To attend a festival in honor of the Thracian goddess of Bendis. To attend a festival in honor of the Thracian goddess of Bendis, Bendis. Socrates and Glaucon visit the Piraeus to attend a festival in honor of the Thracian goddess Bendis. Poster. At Polemachus' house, Socrates speaks to Cephalus about old age, wealth, and justice. Speaks to Cephalus about old age, wealth, and justice. This is done through the Socratic method. This is done through the Socratic method, which, as I already said, consists of a series of questions and answers. It's done through the Socratic method, consisting of a series of questions and answers. For instance, when Cephalus claims that justice is about, when Cephalus claims that justice is about being truthful and returning what one owes, when Cephalus claims that justice is about being truthful and returning what one owes, Socrates folds this definition by asking if it would be just to return weapons one owes to a mad friend. You collected a weapon from your friend 2 weeks ago and he was sane. But now the friend is mad. Will you go back and say, my friend, I'm bringing back your machete? Okay? So just because you want to be just. Okay? So what if the person collects the machete and deals with you? Alright, Socrates followed this definition by asking if it would be just to return weapons one owes to a mad friend. So that means there might be context. There might be context for justice. Alright? There are contexts for justice. And all these things are taken into consideration when civil laws are being made. Okay? The exceptions. So are we up to speed up to that point? When Cephalus claims that justice is about being truthful and returning what one owes, Socrates folds this definition by asking if it would be just to return weapons that one borrowed from a mad friend. So there are many issues that are raised in this book on justice. For instance, justice is seen as the advantage or benefit of the strong. Of course, this can probably happen in a skewed society, a society that is not well organized, so that it's only the powerful and the wealthy who get justice at the end of the day. Find justice as the advantage or benefit of the strong. It is also said in the book that the best rulers are reluctant to rule, but do so out of necessity. The best rulers are reluctant to rule, but do so out of necessity. This is because the best rulers do not want to rule This is because the best rulers do not want to be ruled by an inferior person. Strong rulers rule based on necessity when the occasion demands, because they do not want to be ruled by inferior persons. In the book, it is also said that the just man is wise and good, and the unjust man is ignorant and bad. So Plato maintains that there will always be peace in a just society, whereas an unjust society will always be full of disharmony and conflict. So you could see that all these ideas are implicated in how society is run even till today. The idea of a just society. The just man is wise and good, and the unjust man is ignorant and bad. Injustice brings about conflict and disharmony in society, whereas justice will lead to peace in any given society. So this book is still relevant till today. Alright? Because part of the character of the classical period, is the timelessness of its knowledge. The timelessness and the universality of its knowledge. Whatever knowledge was produced in the classical period is still relevant to today. It's timeless and can still be practiced in any given society. It's universal. Book 2. Book 2 continues with the question of justice in society. Book 2 continues with the question of justice in society. Socrates states that human beings enter political life since each man is not sufficient by nature. Socrates states that human beings enter political life since each man is not self-sufficient by nature. So society exists based on agreement reached between the leaders and the elect. Societies exist based on the agreement, kind of social contract reached between the leaders and the elect. One person cannot provide everything for himself. Cannot be your own security, your own food provider, and everything. Teach your own children, fly yourself when you're traveling, or drive yourself. So that's why society is necessary, because no one is self-sufficient. Okay? At that level. Plato believes that leaders should be selected from the guardians. The leadership of society should be selected from the guardians. Here written in capital G. Selected from the guardians. are the best citizens, well-trained citizens. The guardians are the army that should protect the city. They are the nobles of the city. They are the elders. Well-trained, well-educated on the question of justice, the question of good and evil. And they should constitute the army to protect the city. He says that they should be like dogs. They should be like what? Dogs. They should be like dogs. D-O-G-S. Gentle on the citizens and harsh to the outsiders or the enemies. The guardians should be like dogs, gentle on the citizens, and harsh on the outsiders or the enemies. Okay? Which is what all leaders should look like, should be like. Not the ones who turn around to hurt the citizens and love the outsiders, the enemies. In book 2, Plato emphasizes the education of the guardians. Plato emphasized the education of the guardians. The education of the guardians. And this type of education should be free from parental influences which corrupt the child. Should be free from parental influences which corrupt the child. It should be an objective education, devoid of parental influences. So it is at this point that he says that literature should be banished from society because it does not feel that literature will have a good influence on the education of the guardians. Alright? So poetry should be censored to guarantee the proper education of the guardians. Because in poetry, the gods lie. And fight among themselves, take side, and objective. Except if in poetry the gods are depicted as just, as good, or good forces, exemplary forces, that is when they will be used in the education of the guardians. Otherwise, they should be taught logic and reasoning. They should be taught matters of the state. Remember that the guardians are the nobles. Plato knows that for the peasants, they have their own place. Because in Plato's time, birth was destiny. You are born to a king, you are bound to be a king. You are born to a farmer, you are bound to be a farmer. Book 3. In Book 3, more rules on poetry or literature are presented. Remember that in Plato's time, the word poetry is synonymous with literature. The word poetry is synonymous with literature. So whenever we say poetry, we're talking about literature generally. In Book 3, we are also told that the leadership of society should be selected from the guardians. The leadership of society should be selected from the guardians. This book also presents the myth of the metal. The myth of metal. Myth of metal. Myth of metal is found in Book 3. The quality of each human being is measured in terms of the kind of metal that constitutes them. Those who have gold in them are those who are natural leaders. The natural leaders have the gold metal in them. Silver are those who should be guardians. Bronze are those who should be farmers and other low craftsmen. So we have a stratification of society in Plato's time that we still have till today. We have stratification of society into classes that we still have today. Gold are those who should be natural rulers. Silver are those who should be guardians. Bronze are those who should be farmers and other low crafts. In this book, Plato also believed that the guardians should not have private properties because leadership is usually selected from there and they are the people to guard the city. To guard the city, they should not have private properties. They should simply live based on public donation, what the state gives them. Book 4. Book 4. There should be neither too much wealth or too much poverty in the city, because each extreme can cause social instability. In Book 4, we are told that there should be neither too much wealth or too much poverty in the city, because each extreme can cause what? Social instability. There should be neither too much wealth or too much poverty in the city, as each extreme can cause social instability. When people are too wealthy, it can cause problems. When they are too poor, it can also cause problems. Changes in the city should be gradual. Changes in the city should be gradual, not drastic. Especially where the changes involve the education system or the legal system. Especially where the changes involve the education system or the legal system. They should not be too drastic. They should be gradual. What the city needs to sustain it are rulers who are blessed with wisdom, soldiers who are blessed with courage, and citizens who are blessed with moderation. So that they can follow rules. When they say everybody should go to the right, they go to the right because the guardians have been well trained. They know where everybody should go. But when you say everybody should go to the right, people are moving to the left. That's the problem. So the city should be blessed with wisdom, courage, and moderation. Not doing things overboard. The city will be stable and peaceful. The city will be stable and peaceful if each class performs its proper function. The city will be peaceful and stable if each class, each person, performs its own function. The rulers rule, the farmers farm, the doctors treat, the soldiers guard. Not when the soldier wants to go and be a leader. Problem will start. Alright? The farmer wants to leave his place to go and challenge the king. There will be instability. So everybody should maintain their station. Stay in their place. So, one is said to be just when each of the three parts of the soul, thinking, bodily desires, and emotion, function well. One is said to be just when each of the three parts of the soul functions well. And we are talking about thinking, bodily desires, and emotion. In other words, justice is a natural balance of the soul's parts, and injustice is the imbalance. Justice is a natural balance of the soul's parts, and injustice the imbalance. Injustice the imbalance. Book 5. Okay, so one should keep their bodily desires in check, their emotions in check, their thinking in check, and they should make them work harmoniously. Alright? And justice is the natural balance of these three parts of the individual. And if they are not balanced, you have injustice because problems will arise. Book 5. Plato believed that women can also be guardians. Plato believed that women can also be guardians. Women can also be guardians. He also believed that the best guardian men should marry the best guardian women. Like marry within your class. Something that I think Hitler tried to do. Or even in apartheid, South Africa, they tried it, marry within your class. The best guardian men should mate with the best guardian women. He believed that guardian men are free to have intimacy with as many women as possible to increase the chances of having children of similar nature. He believed that guardian men are free to have intimacy with as many women as possible to increase the chances of having children of similar nature. That's like polygamy, the promotion of polygamy. So now we're promoting polygamy just for the propagation of the tribe. Polygamy aims to propagate the tribe. So the essence of polygamy, even in our traditional society, was to have more people who will work in the farm, all right, who will do the teaming job, right? It was for the propagation of the race. Once the children are born, they are taken away to a training center. He calls it a rearing pen. Rearing pen. Rearing pen. Rearing pen. Training center. Once children are born, they are taken away to a rearing center to be taken care of by nurses. The parents will not be allowed there. The children will be taken care of by nurses, and the parents will not be allowed there. They will not be allowed to know who their own children are. Because I've already said, Plato believes that parents usually indulge their children in the name of love. In the name of parental love. They don't train the child objectively. So the child grows up to cause problems in the state. Alright? Parents in the ideal republic should take all children as their own. Parents in the ideal republic should take all the children as their own. Everyone is everyone's child in the ideal republic. Parents will take all children as their own, so that they can raise them objectively. But the problem is that if we do not know who our children are, we will not know then we will not know who our brothers and sisters are. Because they just go and mix up all the children at the center. Right? Why people still practice this today in child care, child support? They will take a child from parents who cannot take care of them to the children's center. Except that probably now records are kept. But if the state takes your child, you might not find that child again. Okay? So this will create a situation by brother will marry sister. Okay? Because you don't know who your brother was or your sister was. And so it might create incestuous relationship at the end of the day. That's the only problem. Okay? Plato believed that a just society can only be possible when philosophers rule as kings or kings become philosophers. Plato believes that society can only be just. Just society can only be achieved when philosophers rule as kings or kings become philosophers. As far as Plato is concerned, philosophers are the best rulers. Philosophers are the best rulers. Either the king becomes a philosopher, or the king should be, or a philosopher should be king. Book 6. Book 6. In Book 6, Plato gives more reasons why philosophers should be kings. Plato does not like the sophists. He does not like the sophists. Which were set of teachers at the time who used all manners of tactics to persuade their audience, whether it follows logic or not. Those were the sophists. So he called them bad teachers because they corrupt the education of philosophers. I have now. The sophists are seen as bad teachers. They corrupt the education of philosophers, turning them into bad ones. Plato goes on to describe the education of the philosopher, the education of the philosopher king. If the guardian should be trained, then how much more the philosopher king? They should learn what is good. All leaders should learn what is good. In this book, Plato also gives us the way he views reality. Remember, we have said that for Plato, reality is spiritual. Reality is in the ideal world, and the ideal world is the spiritual world. So the ideal world is the original world. The ideal world, or the spiritual world, is the original world. He calls it the world of forms. He calls it the world of forms. The world of forms. The spiritual world is the original world. He also calls it the world of forms. So whatever exists in the real world has the original version in the world of forms, as far as Plato is concerned. So the world in which we live in, as far as Plato is concerned, is an imitation of the world of forms, because that is where you have original world. And so, if we want to know what is real or truth, we need to look at the spiritual world. Because whatever exists in our world is not true, it's not original. It's not original. So when the writer or the artist writes about or paints the real world, Plato says that he is 2 steps removed from reality. So literature is 2 steps removed from reality. In Plato's opinion, literature is 2 steps removed from reality, because the writer copies the real world, the physical world, which is not original. And so the world that he creates in literature is taken from a fake. making literature two steps removed from reality, from the truth. This is why Plato is not comfortable with literature. He sees literature as fiction. Plato defines literature as what? Fiction. Falsehood, not true. So this is why he wants literature banished in society, except the writers are good and they write about good characters and good deeds that can be imitated by young people. Book 7. Book 7. In Book 7, Plato presents the allegory of the cave. The allegory of the cave. Allegory of the cave. K-A-V-E. An allegory is a story that has more than one level of meaning. At least two levels of meaning, the surface level and the deeper level. So the allegory of the cave. So in this allegory, a group of prisoners are chained to a wall in a cave, facing a blank wall. Facing a blank wall. W-A-L-L. In this allegory, a group of prisoners are chained to a wall in a cave, facing a blank wall. In this allegory, a group of prisoners are chained to a wall in a cave, and they are facing a blank wall. There's a fire behind them. And the fire casts shadows on the wall in front of them. There's a fire behind them, and the fire casts shadows on the wall in front of them. There's a fire behind these prisoners, and the fire casts shadows on the wall in front of them. Full stop. These shadows are actual people passing behind the prisoners. These shadows are actual people passing behind the prisoners. These shadows are actual people passing behind the prisoners. These shadows are reality to the prisoners. But that is not the actual reality. To the prisoners, these shadows are reality. But to the person who has a better perspective, that's not the reality. These shadows are reality to the prisoners, but it is not the actual reality. So, Plato uses the shadows to represent the perception of sense experience. Plato uses the shadows to represent the perception of sense experience, while the real humans represent reason. Plato uses the shadows to represent the perception of sense experience, how we perceive of our world. When we see things in the world, we say, oh, this is real. But as far as Plato is concerned, it is the mind that is real. It is the logic, the reasoning that is real. Okay? While the real humans represent reason. Okay? So for Plato, it's the reason that is real. Imagination is real. The spiritual world is real. The mind is real. What you see is, in your sense experience, are just the shadows. So all of you are what? Shadows. The houses are shadows. Right? The real you is in the spiritual world. The real things are in the imagination, imaginative world, in the world of forms. So these shadows are reality to the prisoners, but it is not the actual reality. So Plato uses the shadows to represent the perception of sense experience. How we experience our world is a sense experience. Alright? While the real humans are reason, represent reason. The mind, imagination, the spiritual world, and all of that. So all are but shadows here. They are not real. What you find here is not real. Right? Reality is in the mind. Reality is in the imagination. Reality is in the spiritual world, as far as Plato is concerned. So true education then would be the turning of the soul away from shadows and visible objects to true understanding of forms. True education then will be the turning away of the soul from shadows and visible objects to what? To true understanding of forms, to the true understanding of forms. To be truly educated, one has to look away from what one sees and try to understand the forms of existence. In this book, Plato also talks about the education of the philosopher king, which should consist of poetry, music, physical education, and then graduate to mathematics, arithmetics, number, plane geometry, and solid geometry. The education of the philosopher should start from poetry, music, and physical education. What do we do in physical education? PE. We do PE. Alright? The size of the body. Then from there, so you see all that concerns the physical body. And then, but the last part of education should concern the mind, the development of the mind. Right? Because that's what you need to be a great leader. Yes, you should be physically fit. You should know poetry because you need to know how to speak. Music because you need to know how to entertain. But the best part, the most important part of this education is about the mind, mathematics, arithmetic, geometry, that's logic. Alright? So the education should proceed from poetry, music, physical education, to mathematics, arithmetics, plane geometry, and solid geometry. The final part of this education should be dialectic. Arguments. Dialectic. Dialectic. So how can you be a leader without being able to convince people through logic and reasoning? Through presenting sound debates on issues. This is to dialectic. After this, the political king should be trained for 15 years, additional 15 years, in practical training of leadership. Practical training of leadership will take 15 years. So, after Plato wrote this thousands of years ago about the education of a leader, all right? How the leader should be educated, the number of years it takes to train one leader. We recently elected people who did not even have certificates to rule us. Right? And they ruled successfully for 8 years. And they leave, and then we elect another one whose certificate is not still certain. Thousands of years after he wrote this, on the education of the philosopher king. Right? Book 8. Book 8. Book 8. We have like 19 minutes to the end of the class. You signed up for this, remember? You signed up for this. That you take a 2-hour class every week, right? For each course. So just a moment and then it will be all over. Okay? Book 8. In book 8, Socrates says that the just city is bound to change over time because of the natural law of decay. A just city will not remain just forever. Things decline. In fact, the human history is usually a representation of how the pattern of how society rise and then they fall. So a just city will not remain so forever. Okay? And he says that the city will move from aristocracy through democracy TIMOCRACY. In democracy, ownership of property is what qualifies one to be a leader. In democracy, ownership of property is what qualifies one to be a leader. In aristocracy, the highest class, the most noble class rules. Is government by the nobles or the highly placed citizens. And it's usually hereditary. That means if I rule, then my son will rule after me. That's aristocracy. Government by the nobles, the best citizens. Highest class rule. In democracy, government by those who own properties. They say you cannot be president if you don't have 20 houses in Abuja. You must have 20 houses in Abuja to be qualified to rule as the president of the country. Then the government will now pass to oligarchy. 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 Where a small group of people take control of the government. The government by the few. And then it will move on to sometimes people say that it's only about 5 people that are ruling Nigeria that are trying to infer oligarchy. Okay? Then we have democracy. The next stage of the next evolution of the government will be democracy. Because people people will now rebel against oligarchy. All right? And then we say we want to rule. That will be the citizen government by the people or their representatives. Democracy. And then the final stage is tyranny. Everybody said tyranny. Final stage is tyranny. All right? That is government by despot. Dictatorship. Dictatorship. All right? Tyranny is spelled Tyranny. Tyranny. Government by a despot. Government by a dictator. Right? Dictator. Book 9, ladies and gentlemen. Are you happy that we are at book 9? It is in this book that Plato discusses tyrannical rule. In this book that Plato discusses tyrannical rule. Discusses tyrannical rule. It is in this book that Plato discusses tyrannical rule. Someone is sleeping in April. He identifies three types of individuals. Three types of individuals. It's like April is sleeping in April. Three types of individuals. We have one who pursues wisdom, one who pursues honor, and one who pursues profit. Wisdom, honor, and profit. One who pursues wisdom, one who pursues honor, and one who pursues profit. Pursue, pursue. One who pursues. Right? Three types of individual. One who pursues wisdom, one who pursues honor, and one who pursues profit. And then finally book 10. The main focus of this book is that Plato returns to the need to censor art and poetry in the ideal society to check immorality. The need to censor art and poetry, art and literature in society, and by so doing to check corrupting the mind of the youth. Okay, so we'll stop the class there for today. When we come back, we'll look at Aristotle's Poetics, Aristotle's Humanism. Good morning.